Before we get started, David and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any First Nations people here with us today. By way of a bit of background, Anglicare Victoria's Breaking the Cycle program is recognised for working with adolescent violence within the family context, taking a whole of family intervention approach in response to adolescents who are using violence against family members. The program approach involves a mix of family counselling as well as a group work program with parents to equip them with the knowledge and skills to pursue safety in the home and to repair relationships, as well as direct work with young people. The findings of this evaluation that we're presenting today focus largely on participants of that group work model, which is a manualised therapeutic program for parents and caregivers of adolescents who engage in adolescent family violence in the home. It's an 8-session program and it's been developed and refined over many years, and it's delivered as a part of the Intervening Early AVITH funded service delivery, which we rolled out more extensively from about January 2023. We're now delivering the model across 4 catchments, Western Melbourne, the inner and outer east and the Loddon area. In scaling up the delivery of the Breaking the Cycle program into those new catchments, it allowed us to consider service evaluation and capturing client outcomes from the very beginning of the service delivery. In doing so, we selected the Adolescent Violent Behaviour Questionnaire as a tool that would simultaneously contribute to risk assessment and planning with family members, while also providing us with a measure for the effectiveness of the service at closure. The AVBQ helps to assess the frequency of clients experiencing emotional, psychological abuse, financial abuse and physical abuse from the adolescent child. The AVBQ was developed over many years by family therapists within Anglicare Victoria's Meridian Family Counselling Service. I think there's a few of them here today. And this service really pioneered service provision approaches in response to AVITH prior to this broader Victorian government funding of the current suite of AVITH services across the state. The tool enables us to capture information about abuse frequency, and we provide it to clients at service commencement, and we also use it to inform the program's specific risk assessment and safety planning. And I think this has been really key to the success of embedding it within the service delivery, is that it isn't just a pre-post questionnaire that allows us to track outcomes. It's something that is really useful to the staff and the delivery of the service in helping us to assess risk and safety plan with clients. It's then completed again at service closure, generally by parents or caregivers receiving the Breaking the Cycle group, and also those receiving the family counselling intervention. The results from the closure AVBQ are used again to inform safety planning, closure planning, but also for the service evaluation. I'm going to hand over to David now, who's going to talk through the evaluation results as well as the tool in a bit more detail.
Thank you. Just bear with us as we do a bit of an equipment swap. If it doesn't go too badly, might need to do one of those long breaths out at this moment. Okay, so we talk a lot in our sector about outcomes tools. I actually have the word outcomes in my position title, and I've grown to really hate it. I've grown to hate the word outcomes, and I've grown to hate the term outcomes tool even more. Because I come from a practice background through family services. I'm a social worker. And I think a lot of us, when we hear the word outcomes tool, we're immediately thinking, oh, okay, this is kind of a research bureaucracy thing, and this is something I've got to do on top of my assessment, pain in the ass thing I have to do. And I understand. I often make this tired joke that I remember from my practice days, you're not so much caught up on your admin as maybe less behind on a good day. But I think what this speaks to is the fact that a lot of the tools we use aren't looking at the things that are of core interest when we're assessing presentation in families and clients. And if you have a really good assessment tool and you use it twice, in many ways your outcomes imperative is taken care of. And this is what we want to speak to you today about the AVBQ, and just further to Kate's point that this is really driving assessment, risk assessment in the family, used at the start of an intervention, then used again at the end. And from that we can see how things have changed, which is very useful for evaluation, but at that client level useful for thinking about things like emerging or ongoing needs and, you know, post-closure planning, all that kind of stuff. I'd like to get us as a sector talking more about assessment and less about outcomes. I think if you do assessment and review right, the outcome side of things almost takes care of itself. So the AVBQ was developed by Anglicare's Meridian program, which has been operating in the AVITH space for a very long time now, around 30 years or so. It's come largely out of a family therapy tradition, and the behaviours or experiences that are asked about in the AVBQ, these are really core to what we want to assess in an AVITH presentation context. So we've split it into three thematic subscales. At some point we might do a factor analysis and kind of see how it hangs together statistically, but for the moment we just kind of look at things thematically. So the first subscale, it's the longest, emotional and psychological abuse. You can see the sorts of behaviours described here. And what we want to know is how frequently are these being experienced within the family. And you have this 5-point scale here. 5 is daily, 4 frequently, once a week, occasionally, rarely, never. The way we will score these thematic subscales, and this is really important, is we will take the highest score out of any of these behaviours and that becomes the score. So if there's only one of these behaviours going on but it's occurring daily, we would say there's daily emotional and psychological abuse within this family system. That's really important because we don't want to assume that a greater or lesser number of behaviours is that clinically useful. It's really about the frequency. If you're experiencing one type of emotional abuse daily or 5 types of emotional abuse daily, you're still experiencing emotional abuse daily. So that's how we score this. I'm going to take you through and show you some graphs shortly. I'm going to move through the emotional psychological abuse thematic subscale first. So as Kate mentioned, we were able to get some pre-post data for families that largely did the group work model. Our AVITH programs combine often group work and family work and sometimes individual work with children, young people where possible. We were able to get this data for 63 families. So it's a reasonably chunky sample for us to infer something. And as I said, the way we score it, the highest score out of any of these items is actually a pretty conservative way to score it. So looking at pre-post, what we see at the beginning of the intervention, you have a massive proportion of families who are experiencing emotional or psychological abuse behaviours daily or frequently. No one's experiencing it never or rarely, which makes sense because they're presenting to an AVITH service, and there's a very, very tiny number where it's occasional. When we look at it at closure, you can see that curve has flattened out quite a lot. You've still got some people who are experiencing these behaviours daily or frequently, but now you've got a lot more where it's occasional or rare. So people have diverse experiences and a diverse range of outcomes. But what we see here is pretty compelling evidence that this is an effective intervention. The speaker after Kate and myself, Larissa, is from that program. She'll take you through the model and some stuff on the adolescent cycle of violence, which is a pretty fundamental part of the model, and synergises well with what Alison and Trent were talking about this morning around when young people are heightened and adults can be heightened as well, and when's best to intervene and when is best not to. So I won't take you through the curve changes for all of the items or behaviours that we would describe as emotional or psychological abuse. I'll just pull out a couple by exception. So threatening self-harm or suicide at commencement, there's a diversity of experiences here. A lot of people, this was a never or rarely, but you can see there are quite a few where it's occasional, frequent, or even some where it's daily. Whereas at closure, that's gone right off for a lot of people. Now there's a massive proportion where it's never or rarely, still some with some ongoing needs there. As to whether these are, I guess, genuine expressions, or rather expressions of genuine suicidal ideation, or maybe parasuicidal behaviour, a young person attempting to elicit a response through that kind of talk, there's a lot potentially to unpack there, and this is experienced in a lot of ways. They're also not mutually exclusive, those two. However, what we do see is just this, this outburst around this talk, the rates of it going right down. Same thing with threatening to leave home or take risks, which is a common threat made, and indeed behaviours are often carried out along those lines. So we see that whilst this doesn't affect everyone at commencement, it does affect quite a number of people, and at closure that's come right down. The useful thing about, just before I move on to the next subscale, the useful thing about using the AVBQ as part of the assessment, it drives that risk assessment, is it's really letting us know about these sorts of behaviours that are really high risk issues, or where there's safety planning required. And as all of you would appreciate, being in this space, it's often that immediate focus on safety that's really important, so you can create that space to do more repair work along the line. So I'll move on to the financial abuse subscale. It's got a fewer number of items here. You can see them there, searches through your belongings and so on. We use the same scoring convention. The highest frequency of any of these is the score for that thematic subscale. And again, what we see is that at commencement, this is really common that people are experiencing these. They do vary in their presentation, but something's going on along these lines, with most families experiencing this daily or frequently. Whereas at closure, again, this is flattened off. It's come down considerably in terms of this occurring daily, though there are still people who are having that experience. In terms of a specific type of behaviour which bears some discussion, this one's come up again. So it's often the case, sorry, my graphs, looks like my graphs squatting on the ground there. But it's often the case that within families experiencing AVITH, this is a trigger, as other speakers have spoken to today, for very complex reasons. I'm sure there are a number of us in this room who wish we use our phones a little less. I mean, these things are damn addictive. And as other speakers have pointed out, there are young people who are using them to regulate their own emotions. Especially neurodiverse young people may derive particular benefits from that. So this can be a real trigger for conflict in the family. But what we'd see is that this issue of reacting when asked to stop the use of technology, parents are being equipped with skills to try to address this stuff, to try to bring it down somewhat. Larissa next will speak quite a lot about the adolescent cycle of violence, and I think that's really key to understanding when is the time to intervene and when is the time to maybe back off, as distinct from backing down. Then finally, we've got the physical abuse or intimidation subscale. And this is, kind of what it sounds like. It's physically abusive or physically threatening behaviours. The curve here looks a little different at commencement. Whereas with the other two, emotional abuse and financial abuse, we saw the great majority of people are experiencing this daily. That's not the case with this, though, concerningly high numbers still are experiencing this daily. But quite a lot are experiencing this frequently. This is interesting to me because this speaks to, I guess, the landscape of how abusive and controlling and reactive sometimes behaviours can present in these families. So physical violence and physical threats certainly are a key consideration, though it would appear these occur a little less often than some of these other behaviours. At closure, again, same thing. We see that curve flattened out quite a lot, indicating that the break in the cycle intervention is helping to equip. Often it's focused on helping to equip parents to manage some of these issues better and start to prevent the violence occurring. And of particular note here, use of a weapon is something that we ask about. It's obviously very important for risk assessment and safety planning. For most people at commencement, this is not occurring or not occurring very often, though for a concerning number, it's still occurring. Whereas at closure, we see this as the proportion where this is now not an issue, never, has gone up quite a lot. Lastly, one thing that the AVBQ asks about, aside from the frequency of various emotional, financial and physically abusive behaviours, is parents' subjective disturbance. How disturbed do they feel by their young person's behaviours? And at commencement, we can see this is just a single question on a 0 to 10 scale, 0 being no disturbance, 10 being maximum disturbance. That's basically everyone is halfway up the scale or higher, and most people are in that 7 to 10 range. Pretty understandable, given that it's often parents or grandparents or other caregivers we're dealing with, and things have gotten to a point where they're presented to a service, however it was that they ended up coming through the door. Whereas at closure, whilst there are still some people experiencing considerable disturbance, it's gone down quite a lot. And now most people are in that kind of 0 to 5 range, which is a great thing. So there's a bit of a summary piece here, but I guess rather than read it out to you verbatim, I would say that our experience with the AVBQ has been that being able to roll that into our assessment and then review or closure processes, that's been really key to driving consistent risk assessments that are looking at all the kind of behaviours of concern. And that list of behaviours was arrived at after years and years of practice from the Meridian team. And that is able to then let the practitioners know what is the presentation, what is the severity, what kind of safety planning needs to occur. And then at closure, we're able to see, what are the changes. And as almost a secondary benefit, that can evidence the effectiveness of the model, though that's not the primary intention of the AVBQ. So look, I might stop it there. We're running a little ahead of time, so maybe there's a bit of time for questions, if there are any questions.